Good evening, everybody. This is Jonathan. I hope you are all doing well as we're kind of winding down the summer. And again, I hope that you've all had a nice, safe summer and we'll all have a nice, safe fall. Tonight, I have a very special guest, a current Social Security employee, an adjudicator. This is a person, we're going to call her Linda. And Linda is not speaking for Social Security. She's only going to be speaking based on her own observations, her experiences. So we're going to ask her some questions. I've got a bunch of questions I'm going to ask her. And of course, you have questions we can ask her as well. If she can't answer, she's going to say, I can't answer because, some things she's just not going to know or won't feel comfortable answering. And that's cool. And hopefully, you'll get some we'll get some value out of this. So, okay. So Linda, you are right now muted. So if you could unmute there you go. Okay. So Linda, how are you doing tonight? And thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. And hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here and hope that I can answer questions and help demystify the process a bit for everyone.
Yep. And that's really what I'm trying to do here is that, I think one of the things that I felt very strongly about when I got into this 30-something years ago, it's very much of a black box. A lot of people don't know what goes on behind the scenes. And we're trying to demystify that, like you said, a little bit, and hopefully that'll happen. So let me start. Again, I've got some questions lined up, but before we get to that, I'm going to ask the questions, a couple of questions that I've always wanted to know. And I want to, Linda, if you can kind of just tell me what you can about this. The timeline. People are very, very focused on the delays. So kind of walk me through from your perspective. And I know we talked a little bit before we got on here that you get the file after it's a certain point. It starts out with Social Security before it gets to you. And I guess before we get into that, you are technically working for the state, for a state agency. You're not actually an employee of Social Security. Is that correct?
That is correct. So in most states in the country, the Social Security Administration has contracted with the state for individuals who are adjudicating disability claims. So they are not Social Security employees. They are employees of the state. However, they are working the Social Security claims. They're the ones doing the middle development, as we call it, of those claims.
All right. And you told me something else kind of interesting, that the computer systems that you've got are very, very restricted in the sense that, I guess they don't want people, checking their Facebook or going on Amazon, things like that. So you're very restricted as far as what you can see on the computer, correct?
That is correct. Sometimes to a fault, I believe. And I think I was telling you earlier, there are times when we're trying to obtain medical records as quickly as possible, just to move a claim as quickly as possible for someone. I will enter a doctor's office or click the link to their practice, and I get that it's restricted. Social Security will not allow me to visit that site. So I can't visit your doctor's website to get the fax number, for example. So certainly, shopping on Amazon, social media, personal email, we cannot access with the filters that are on our device.
And I think the thing to take from this is that those of us filling out applications, and certainly people, filling out the forms for Social Security, if they ask for your doctor's phone number, fax number, address, fill that in. Because as Linda says, it's hard for them to get that information. So you've got to, as the claimant, you've got to provide that. You don't want to assume they can get that very easily. And again, you told me that someone's going your own phone to get it, but that's going above and beyond. And you've got, I'm sure, a lot of work to do, and having to kind of fight to get that information, I'm sure, is not the best use of your time.
Definitely. And I look at it as if it takes me 60 to 90 extra seconds to enter a search on my personal device and try to find a fax number for a doctor, that saves me weeks of, a request for medical evidence going through the mail to a doctor's office somewhere else in the state, and then tracking its way back to our offices. I'm going to do it. I'm going to take the time to do that. But yes, as much information as you can fill in on your application about your doctor's offices, have that correct address, have a suite number, a fax number, the doctor's name, and the name of the practice. It helps to have there. And I know these hospitals and practices are constantly changing names, being acquired, but as much information that's current as you can provide is helpful.
Right. And spell it correctly. I mean, I tell my clients, go take a few minutes, go online, make sure everybody's name is spelled correctly. Like you said, the name of the practice, the phone number, the address, make a real difference and really cut down on those delays. So absolutely. All right, so walk me through kind of the general timeline again from your perspective. The case is originated, somebody files an application online. It goes to the field office, correct? Which is not you. This is the Social Security field office. And again, you may or may not know what goes on there, but what's happening at the field office and how does it get to you?
Yes, fair question. And I will try to answer that to the best of my knowledge. I think what a lot of us think happens at the field office is your application goes into some dark hole and never to be seen again. What I understand is happening at the field office is, I guess it goes into a queue of sorts. They're filtered through, they're assigned to field office representatives who then will determine what title of claim someone is eligible for. I'm understanding that they schedule times to call claimants and get as much of that information as possible, making sure contact information and treating sources are all correct. At that point, I don't know what happens. It eventually ends up with one of the state agencies, and it will end up in a staging queue, which is just kind of the holding area before it gets assigned to an adjudicator. I do know that the agencies across the country are being closely watched to see how many claims they have in staging. Social Security is keeping tabs on that. They are expecting state agencies to be whittling down those backlogs. Our own agency our staging queue kind of began to creep up. And so definitely upper management has done a number of things to rectify that and to assign more claims and have more individuals in our agency working on those claims than normally would. So beyond just adjudicators, but we have individuals who are in management positions now who are working on claims. So we're trying to keep that caseload low. Once we receive a claim, once it is assigned to an adjudicator, and I can speak for myself and speak for expectations in my own agency, that is really when the timeline starts. I know for me personally, I will, within 1 to 2 business days of receiving that claim, I will call the claimant. I will request records. I will go through any records we have in file. That starts the clock for me. I then set diaries for 2 weeks out. And that point, I will follow up with the claimant. If I haven't heard from them, if we haven't received that function report, and we'll get into that more, and follow up on any medical records I haven't received. Maybe I sent it to the wrong fax. Maybe the practice has moved. Maybe they received it, but thought it was a duplicate request and it got lost. Things happen. So that 2-week mark is...
Let me stop you real quick.
Yeah,
I do have a question about that. No. People ask me frequently, should they submit medical records with their application?
That is a great question. From my standpoint, and the way that I manage my claims, I can get just about anything. And if I can't, because I have assigned authorization and because it's coming from, with the government seal on it, it looks official. It's not just a Post-it note requesting your records. It's very official looking. They're taken seriously. It becomes, it becomes confusing, honestly, to start getting records from a representative, from a claimant, because what we are receiving from you all is not necessarily the complete record. And sometimes there's duplication. Sometimes it's a list of prescriptions. I've gotten that a lot. That's not giving us functional information from your doctor. If you have seizures or psychological condition, then that information can be helpful, but that's going to be contained in the medical record. So I would advocate for not sending that unless your adjudicator has said, I'm having difficulty getting records from this source. And that happens infrequently. For me, I will reach out to the claimant or the representative to let them know, look, we have sent requests, we have followed up. This is when we followed up. This is what the practice is saying. Ultimately, the claimant has the relationship with that doctor. So we are a faceless government entity, but they want to keep you happy. You're their patient. So if you call them and say, I really need you to send these records. I understand that they have requested them several times from you. I really need you to send them. This is for my disability claim. It's important. If it gets to that point, I will let the claimant or representative know. It's very rare that happens, but it can be confusing and just a lot of extra to be randomly getting bits and pieces of incomplete records from a representative or a claimant. So as I said, if I cannot get those records, if something is going on at that practice and they just aren't cooperating, I'll reach out. And at that point, we'll say, can you maybe try to lean on them, put a little
Encourage.
pressure on them. I never want my claimants to go to FedEx or somewhere and have to pay to fax records to us or pay to send a large volume of records through the mail. I just don't want you all to incur that. That is something that we pay for. We pay for the records. There is a fee. We pay for the shipping or the faxing of them. I really want the process to be as seamless and as easy as possible for my claimants.
I mean, one of the things I had heard, and you tell me if this is wrong or correct, is that, I've had adjudicators tell me in the past, one of the reasons they're concerned about having a claimant or even the representative submit the records is that, like you said, not just incomplete, but those records could be possibly scrubbed, where stuff that is maybe not as favorable to the claimant has been removed. And so that in the interest of full accuracy, the adjudicators would prefer to get it on their own. That way they're comfortable it's a complete record. Is that ever a factor? Is that something that goes into play? Or is it more it's just confusing to get bits and pieces from different places?
For me, it's more confusing. And I've also had claimants send me screenshots. I know a lot of medical practices have apps where you can access a patient portal. Right. So I've had screenshots sent to me. And what those are often missing is your name, the date that something occurred. So I might have a doctor's visit, or I might have an MRI report, but your name is not in the patient's name is not in the screenshot. The date of that MRI might not be in the screenshot. So a complete medical record from a physician is going to contain that information. And you can tell me all day long that that's your MRI and that was taken on December 12th. But if that's not on the record, under Social Security guidelines, that could be anybody's MRI.
Yep, very, very true. What about portals? Do you find that the information from portals is less complete than the actual record, or are they about the same, or do you not like portal information?
As far as being sent screenshots, it tends to just be incomplete. There's so much, sometimes too much in medical records. They can be lengthy. Sometimes they repeat. I know we've discussed there are several providers nationwide, and they tend to repeat everything for every doctor's appointment. Yeah. However, I know that everything's
the VA
there.
Being the biggest offender in that regard.
I'm not going to say it. I'm sure that
I can say it, but you're not going to say it. Okay.
No, the VA, and there are others, but they will list every single appointment and symptom and condition and prescription before they get to a quarter of a page physical exam. So, however, at least it's all there. And at least I have your name, the date of the appointment, the doctor's signature. And that sometimes is not always in a screenshot from a portal.
How far back do you go in terms of requesting records? Let's say somebody files an application. They say, I became disabled September 3rd, 2024. How far back do you go? I mean, I always thought it was about a year and a half or a year. Is that in the ballpark, or it depends on the ailment? What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So under Social Security guidelines, there are two conditions for which we try to get records as far back as possible. Doesn't matter if you became disabled a year ago or 5 years ago. That is anything related to mental health and anything related to the heart, cardiac.
Really? Okay,
because those conditions, yes, there's the longitudinal nature of those conditions needs to be documented. So I have had claimants mention, for example, if they go to, and I don't fault anyone. If we say, try to tell us everything you can remember, we know you're trying. What's difficult is when we've come to the end of a claimant has gone to a mental status exam or an all systems exam, consultative exam, and that doctor has said, what providers have you seen? Oh, well, in 1995, I was actually an inpatient psychiatric. Wow. That's something that I haven't requested and didn't know about. We have to request those records, and they might not even exist anymore. There are a number of facilities who only retain records so long, but we must, under Social Security guidelines, attempt to get those. Okay. So if there's anything, medical records contain a lot of information. So if we even discover it, is what we call it, that you had a cardiac catheterization in 1985, for example, but you're filing now because your spine is falling apart and you're in a lot of pain. I still have to get those records or attempt to get those records from 1985. Now, if you need a listing for your spine, that becomes moot. But what we're looking at, are there any other factors? Because we really are trying to do everything in the best interest of the claimant and find the most favorable decision possible for the claimant. So we would not want to deny someone if we find that their spinal condition does not meet a Social Security listing. And then we discovered that you had a cardiac catheterization in the 80s. We still have to go back and try to get those records, because that could change ultimately your capacity to return to work.
Right, functioning capacity.
Mhm.
What about situations? I know that there are a lot of these medical providers like SciOx and these other ones, and I know from my end, we have trouble because we'll request records and they want to charge an arm and a leg because, attorneys that do, let's say, personal injury or other types of liability, they may charge $5 a page. And so
Oh,
I'll get
goodness.
these bills for, $350. I'm like, wait a minute, this is Social Security. Do you have trouble where the provider says, we want you to pay, $350, and you're like, well, Social Security will pay you $20 or whatever it is. I think it's a pretty low amount. Is
It
that
is.
ever an issue?
I have received, and I kind of chuckle at it because that's not going to happen. Good luck getting that out of Social
Yeah.
Security. But I've very rarely received an invoice that says it is this much per page, and here's 1,200 pages of medical records. And I chuckle because, one, I don't deal with the authorization of that payment. Two, I know that our flat fee is $20. It's $20.
Right.
And the agency is not going to pay that up front. It is
Right.
once we receive the records, then you will be paid. Again, precious few practices, one will request that we pay that up front. And if that's the case, then we just can't get those records. Period. End of story. And then two, I've very rarely, I could count on one hand the number of times that I've seen a provider say it will be this much per page, and here are all the pages. So I would say to an attorney representative and a patient, if a medical provider for either you or a claimant is saying we're going to charge you this much per page for your own medical records, no, that is something that the government pays as part of processing your claim.
Got it. Do you use the HIT system, the Health Information Technology system,
Yes.
to get records a good bit?
Love the HIT system. And as many
That's
providers that are on it.
Yeah, those who don't know, tell us what that is.
I don't know what that stands for, but I do know it means.
It stands for Health Information Technology. My understanding
Well,
is the government has negotiated, I guess, deals with various large providers, medical providers, where they can get these records electronically. That's all I really know about it. And we'll frequently reach out to adjudicators or hearing offices and say, will you do a HIT request to get these records? And they tend to come in really quick. That's all I know.
Immediate. It's pretty much immediate. There's no human that has to touch it, is my understanding. So it's my computer talking to their computer, and the records come within hours generally.
Okay.
It's fantastic. And the more, the better that we can get on board with that. Now the VA does HIT request, but there must be an electronically signed 827 or the authorization to release records in order for them to honor that. Other practices will take wet signed or the e-signed, but VA does require the e-signed.
Really?
It is so much faster. Oh goodness. And there's one vendor number that to request VA records nationwide through their HIT system. So if you were seeing, and this can be the case sometimes, that a claimant has, moved from one coast to the other, maybe they served in whatever branch of the military. I know folks in the military move around frequently, but that can be multiple sources and locations that we're trying to track records from. It's so much easier to have that electronic signed 827 authorization to release your records. We can send a HIT request and have those VA records within hours.
Okay. And 827, for those who don't know, that's a medical authorization. And generally speaking, when we sign a client, we have them sign electronic, the 1696, which is the appointment of representative, the 1693, which is the fee agreement, and the 827. So, it's available to Social Security electronically, which is really, really nice. So, all right. So I asked you all these questions. So you're basically telling us that you request the medical records, you diary it, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. I think you said that you try to get this out pretty quickly within a few days of getting the file assigned. And then tell me, you're kind of getting into how long it takes and how many times you have to request it and things like that.
Yes. Well, I want to say something on the 827, the authorization to release records. Ironically, there are some sources that will only take a wet signed 827. So it's few and far between. Walgreens, CVS, I believe. So if someone
Hmm.
has seizures, we typically try to get pharmacy records to show that you are refilling your medication, you're compliant with treatment. They only take a wet signed 827. So if you have worked with your attorney or filed online and you feel like did the e-signed 827, I'm good, but my adjudicator is calling me saying I can't get your records, I need a wet signed, that would be why. There are a few medical treating sources who require that wet signed. Anyway, yes. So back to processing a claim. Once it arrives in our agency, it's assigned to an adjudicate. It is assigned to an adjudicator. Excuse me. We are expected to develop that claim within 48 hours. We will request medical records, contact the claimant. We'll send an introduction letter or a call-in letter. We'll send the ADLs, that function report, work history report, if it's an initial or reconsideration claim. We do need those back, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later, the importance of those. At about the 15-day mark, 2 weeks approximately after we've initially developed your claim, we're going to follow up with your treating sources. We'll follow up with you if we haven't received that form, your function report. If we have everything we need, we can then go ahead and work toward sending it to our doctors to review or ordering a consultative exam. And I want to make clear, and Social Security is very clear, we do not deny people because we can't get their medical records or because their medical records are insufficient. We do look for a claimant's cooperation, and we are the only government service, I guess, that requires claimant cooperation. It's not you automatically qualify and you start receiving disability. The cooperation comes in the form of returning that function report. So that is what we're really looking for, is we need to see that you are willing to tell us how your conditions affect you day to day. Then we are able to proceed with ordering an exam if we need it. If we have an outstanding source at that 15-day mark, we follow up. And then at 25 days is when we will make a decision. That is kind of our deadline to get medical records in, to get function reports in. At that point, if we feel that a claimant's records are incomplete or insufficient, that is when we will order an exam, either mental status, IQ. We have CTANI for folks who are non-speaking or for very young children, speech language exams, ophthalmological exams, or we'll order an all systems exam, the physical exam with any imaging.
Okay.
And that can cause, I know some folks get frustrated. It varies, the speed with which those are scheduled, those consultative exams. Doctors are just like anyone else. They take vacations typically in the summer and around the holidays. So when we hit those times of year, we kind of start to see delays in those appointments getting scheduled. And then there are weather delays also in the winter in some parts of the country.
And the doctors, there's a panel of doctors, there's a group of doctors that in any one office, these are the ones you send to. That's not, I mean, I assume that there are certain doctors who've already qualified with Social Security to provide these exams.
Correct. So they are called panelists is what we call them, not because they're a panel of doctors. They are actually throughout each state. They are contracted with Social Security. They've been trained on what it is that we need from an exam. And it's a very structured report that you can have sent to your own provider. It is part of your medical record. We will not release it to the claimant, but we will release it to their provider if they sign an authorization saying that they want that sent to their doctor to become part of their medical record. But these are doctors and psychologists throughout your state who have been trained and are contracted. Many of them are still in private practice. They do this on the side or certain days of the week, and they conduct exams for us.
And I'm not sure if you have any sense of, because I know one of the complaints I get is, I went to the doctor, he spent 5 minutes with me, didn't, touch me, didn't take any reflexes, didn't do anything, and I get this 5-page reports with all these functional limitations. Any sense of, any comment about that? Do you have any thoughts about the quality of doctors? And I have, by the way, had a consultative doctor, John Foster, was on with me a couple months ago, and he seems to do it very, very thoroughly. But I do get complaints about that. Do you hear complaints about that sort of thing as well? Or
I have, unfortunately, yes. And I would encourage anyone who feels that they were slighted in that experience, or the doctor was rude, very brief with them, or maybe they felt like this wasn't thorough, definitely tell your adjudicator or tell your attorney representative another exam can be scheduled. I will say that Typically, we don't have that issue because our panelists are kind of being scrutinized. I mean, we want to be sure that they are doing what we need them to do so we can adjudicate claims under Social Security guidelines. They are also not, so especially, I see this especially when people go to the mental status exams. I'm expecting it to be like an hours long appointment with a psychologist. When it's mental status exams, typically 20 minutes. They are doing a very quick, there's several tests that they do that I won't get into because I don't understand all of them.
Right.
But they're doing a brief, just a mental status exam is what they're doing. They're not doing, unless it's a full scale IQ test. It's not as in depth as if you saw your own provider. And the same is true for our medical doctors who do exams. There are two types of exams. For medical doctors, there's the all systems exam. And again, those are fairly brief. I would not go into that expecting it to be like an appointment with a neurologist or an orthopedist, even though they're doing some of those same tests and maneuvers. It's not going to be as in-depth because they're not diagnosing you. They're really just trying to see your physical function. How do your conditions affect your physical ability to do work? The other type of exam that we send folks to for medical doctors is an office visit. So sometimes we just are lacking, how is that knee affecting someone? Or they're saying that they can't raise their arm and I don't have any medical records showing me that. That's the only allegation that someone has. We don't need a full all systems exam. Really, an office visit, maybe with some imaging, would help us to narrow that down. Or if we have sent a claimant for an all systems exam and maybe the doctor didn't do a thorough job, we felt like we didn't get enough information about that shoulder or knee or whatever joint, we might schedule an additional office visit where that doctor is only looking at that particular condition. Those will be especially brief. But I have heard that from claimants, and I think there's a misunderstanding about the nature of these exams. It is not like seeing one of your providers or a specialist. It is truly a quick look at just what is that functional information that your claim is lacking. And they cannot diagnose and treat. And I've had a few claimants who have asked me if they can go back and see that doctor. And this is not someone you're establishing care with.
Right. And they make it clear at the outset that there's no, doctor-patient relationship. This is basically done for this very, very limited purpose.
Correct. If there are incidental findings on the exam, and I have seen this, like someone's blood pressure is through the roof,
right.
The doctor will let us know if there's anything incidental on imaging. They are, ethically bound to let us know, and then we will let your physicians know.
Okay. And I understand that the reason that people get sent out for the consultatives is Social Security has an obligation to develop the record. And
absolutely.
That's part of that development, because you don't see them in every single case. I mean, I used to see them. Years ago, every case had them. Now, I'd say probably 60% of the cases I see have consultatives and 40% don't.
Wow. Yes. It really depends on your medical records. And we have a number of people. I mean, I understand if you are not working, you likely don't have insurance. And we know that our medical system is, you can't get by without insurance. So, it's very understandable that someone has debilitating conditions and hasn't been able to seek medical treatment. I've seen in medical records a number of times that, the claimant has osteomyelitis, let's say it's an infection of the bone, or maybe their bone is the head of their femur is gone. They're in desperate need of a hip replacement. They can't get that MRI to confirm it because they don't have insurance. They can't afford the surgery, but we have one X-ray that shows this. Therefore, I don't need to get further imaging. That one X-ray, even if it was 2 or 3 years ago, is already showing a destruction of that bone. That doesn't get better. It's not going to regenerate over time. So,
okay, all right. So now we're and again, and from my observation, many states, and I realize every state's different. Certain states like Texas and Florida tend to be the worst in terms of time frame. But it'll take to get a decision at initial. It may take 9, 10, 12 months. So what's going on during that time? Is that, because you're describing a fairly compressed time frame, is it your sense that the cases are really not even in the adjudicator's hands until, let's say, 6 months into it, and then a lot of stuff happens pretty quickly? or other offices not as diligent as what you're describing? I guess the time frames are not adding up in my mind.
No, and I can understand that they wouldn't, because I have had some claims be reassigned when someone has left the agency for any number of reasons. And I've asked myself, what is going on here? And sometimes I will convey that to a claimant on the phone, that I'm very sorry that this has been taking so long. There's really no reason for this. However, the other end of that is, if a claimant doesn't keep a consultative exam for whatever reason, anything can happen. Someone could be hospitalized, they forget, they don't get the notice in the mail. If that is rescheduled, and then sometimes something happens with the doctor, I've also seen that the doctor had a family emergency. Now they had to reschedule. So that just keeps getting bumped out. The other thing that can happen is changes to your own medical conditions. There have been claimants who have, on their initial filing, alleged that they had a stroke, which we have to place a medical hold for certain conditions, and that is one where we defer. And a claimant should receive something in the mail indicating that their claim is in deferment.
And
the reason for that,
you're waiting to see how they recover.
Right, because yes, anyone who's had a stroke, it's their worst day when they've had the stroke, and hopefully it's uphill from there. And yes, the brain takes a while to repair, and that can be 3 months, that could be 6 months. The same is true after having coronary bypass surgery, or CABG, CABG, open heart surgery. So that is an automatic medical deferral that can delay a claim. It's true, once it gets to our agency, it should be moving swiftly. There are things that can delay. Doctors having to reschedule these consultative exams, conditions that come up. I'm not saying don't tell your adjudicator. If you've had a heart attack and you initially filed for degenerative disc disease, please let your adjudicator know, because that needs to be investigated. Those records need to become part of your claim. But that can delay things, waiting for those records. If you have a knee replacement coming up, we then need to hold and wait until we get those records for your surgery, and then we get follow-up appointments with your doctor. So sometimes, and especially for individuals who are not able to work because they are not feeling well, for a number of medical conditions, other conditions can pop up, and that can delay things. And I hate to see the domino effect, but it's an unfortunate part of the human body, honestly, is that none of us are getting younger, and we tend to not get better with age. Things start to fall apart and feel worse.
Not me personally. I've decided not to get older. So
that's a great idea. I'm with you.
Yeah. I mean, if you saw me in the tennis court, you wouldn't believe it. But yes, I do have decided that I'm going to arrest the aging process. But I don't know if it's going to work or not. But that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. All right. So you've gathered the medical records. At what point does it go to? And I understand there are medical specialists that you contract with that actually are reviewing the records. Is that correct?
Yes. So it is separate from the panelists who might do your consultative exam. But these are state agency medical consultants. SAMC is the abbreviation. So there are medical doctors, there are MDs, there are psychologists, there are speech language pathologists who are reviewing the claims under Social Security guidelines. So they will take all of the medical records. The adjudicator's job is to go through and kind of highlight and bookmark. These are the things that we think are important in the records, electronically bookmark. If there was a consultative exam, then that is also sent to the doctor. Our doctors have access to everything in a claim. They can see a function report, they can see an x-ray, and they will access things that we maybe didn't bookmark. I think that's really important that they do that. They can open that medical record and look for themselves, because they are the doctors, they have the training. But they will go through and review the claim under Social Security guidelines, and they will make a determination that they call a medical opinion. And this is something that our panelists do, the panelists who conduct our consultative exams. And that medical opinion is a residual functional capacity. Based on all of the conditions, what is it that this claimant physically can do and mentally? How strenuous of activity can this person take on given all of their medical conditions?
And this is obviously based on the record, because these doctors are not actually seeing the claimant.
Correct.
They're looking at the record.
We have had doctors recuse themselves from claims if they realize that a claimant is a patient in their practice, not their own patient. Obviously, that would be a
Right.
reason to recuse yourself. But no, if this patient, I've gotten notes from doctors before saying this patient goes to my practice, someone else is going to have to take this claim. That's a conflict of interest. I mean, they have to do that. But yes, once the doctor has reviewed everything, therein lies another delay, or can be. I am speaking in terms of compressed timeline, as you said, because I really value efficiency and accuracy. I want to get my claimants an answer quickly. I don't want their claim lingering. Let's get the records. Let's make a decision. Let's send them for exam if we can. Our doctors, if you can imagine, across any state, the number of claims that are waiting, there are only so many doctors for any state that can review those claims. And they must review all of the claims. That is not something an adjudicator can sign off on. In very rare circumstances, and we talked about this before, the DEDA, Disability Examiner Decisional Authority, that's very rare circumstances. It's got to be a medical doctor or a PhD to sign off on that claim, or both. So those cues, medical and psychological cues, can get very backed up, as you can imagine. There's couple of hundred adjudicators in a state, maybe 100 adjudicators in a state. There are not nearly that many doctors that are reviewing every single claim. So currently the backup, and it varies state to state, it could be a few weeks, it could be a few months before that claim is assigned to a doctor. After all the records have come in, after your adjudicator has reviewed everything and sent it to the doctors to look at, it could still take another couple of weeks to months for the doctor to view that. Adjudicators can help move things along by writing their own proposed medical assessment. The doctors are still going to look at everything and open everything for accuracy and review it for accuracy before they add their medical opinion to that.
All right, couple of questions, and I got to
Yes.
ask you this because people ask all the time, and you may not know, but people log into their My Social Security account, and it will say your claim is 35% complete or 45% complete. Where do those percentages come from?
My understanding is the percentages have gone away and there's different terminology being used that's supposed to be a better reflection of what is actually going on with the claim. I don't know where it comes from. I cannot access my SSA no more than I can access your bank account. It's very protected information, and I think that's good. It needs to be that way. I think if you are wondering where your claim is, call your adjudicator. And there's only so much information that we can give. It's pending, or the doctors are reviewing it. But if I guess I don't understand very long periods of time and lagging going on without a claimant understanding what's happening. If you haven't received notice that your claim is in medical deferment, for example, if you haven't received a notice of a consultative exam that's not scheduled until November, that really stinks, but at least it's still in progress.
Right.
But yeah, if you feel that you haven't heard anything in a while, reach out to your adjudicator and ask them, can you let me know what's going on? And by haven't heard anything in a while, I don't mean a week. I mean, if you have, you're gotten to the end of this process, which really going to that consultative exam is you're kind of getting to the end of the process, and you haven't heard anything in a while, it's possible it's sitting in the queue for the medical doctors to review. But it's okay. Reach out, ask.
What is the effect of a congressional inquiry? Does that move things along faster?
I'm not certain if it's a flag in the claim. I'm not certain that it does expedite anything. I've received claims with the congressional inquiry. I still can only get your medical records as fast as the doctors send them to me. And I can only schedule an exam as quickly as that panelist has availability. Yes, I see them. And I don't want to say it means nothing, but we can't really expedite. There's certain parts of the life of a claim that we can't expedite.
But that's easy for me to say. Would that be the same for, let's say, a dire need or other things that would otherwise expedite? But again, there's certain things you have to go through. You got to do it. So is it really going to make that much of a difference? Dire need or 100% VA? Or congressional inquiry.
Yeah, and I get the question about the VA a lot. Their guidelines are completely different than Social Security guidelines. Yep. So being found disabled, 80%, 100% through the VA, does not equal being found disabled under Social Security guidelines.
But if you are 100% VA, that should put you at the front of the line, is my understanding. Certainly for hearings, it does. I don't know if it's
yeah, I'm not aware that it does put you in the front of the line for assignment to an adjudicator. I do understand that Terry claims, so those are terminally ill, folks who are the likelihood of them passing from their condition is great. Those obviously get assigned quickly, and some agencies have entire units that are devoted to those claims because those people need an answer very quickly.
Right. Does it help when I'm filling out an application? I will sometimes reference the grid rule, or I may reference a listing, or the fact that it's a Terry case. Is that move the meter at all? Is that helpful? Is it something that you've got to make your own decision on?
I'm not sure I understand.
Okay. No, let's say I'm doing an application for somebody and they're 57 years old. Their past work is unskilled, and they, in my opinion, they meet grid rule, 202.06 because they're, unskilled past work or no transferable skills, and they're clearly limited to light RFC or less. Or I think that they meet a listing because they're on the heart transplant list, let's just say. Is it something that even makes a difference to an adjudicator to see that, or is it just something it's got to go through the process regardless?
Okay, I understand. We definitely, when we're sending those claims to the medical queue, we will flag that for the doctors just to alert them. This is someone who maybe has less than a high school education, haven't worked in the last 5 years. There are certain things that we will say, really look out for this one. This wouldn't take much to allow this person. If it meets a listing, and then you mentioned transplant, unfortunately, someone who is on the transplant list does not necessarily meet the Social Security listing. Under Social Security guidelines, you are disabled from the day of transplant. I have had claimants that have been on the list for organ transplantation for 18 months and are clearly in bad shape. I mean, if you're on the organ transplant list, you're not doing great. No. And I have fought to and just scrounged to get the medical records to prove this person cannot work right now. A lot of it depends on age. If you're 32 years old and on the organ transplant list compared to 55 years old, those are very different things. If you have a high school education, or if you have limited education, if you've worked in the last 5 years, or if all of your work has been in the factory and has been very physical work. So all of those metrics play into it. So I see what you're saying. It's the vocational rule tables. And boy, if there's something that is difficult to understand, that is the vocational rule tables are tricky.
Yeah. We're talking about the medical vocational rules or the grid rules, because again, you've got to make decisions about somebody's, functional capacity, and that's not a given. That's something, that's what the evidence is going to show. Right.
Exactly. And I think that's another part of the process it can be confusing. I don't feel well. I can't work. My spine is blown out, or my leg has been amputated, and I can't work. I can't go back to my job in the Amazon warehouse. What the vocational rules and Social Security guidelines are looking at are permanent disability. Are you able to return to any work? It might not be the job that you had in the Amazon warehouse, but could you do a sedentary job, a desk job? If you have an 8th grade education and you're 55 years old, the likelihood of you being able to be trained in something with a computer is not as great as someone who's 23 and has a high school education. I like to say, can't teach an old dog new tricks. I'm not calling anyone an old dog, but it rings true, because part of the metric that Social Security is looking at is the older we are, the more difficult it is to learn a new vocation, especially if it's a sedentary job where computers are involved. Give an 8-year-old an iPhone and they will prove me right. So
yeah. Now, what happens if, let's say that you see a case and you feel, it looks pretty strong on your mind, but the medical doctor that you sent it out to comes back and says, this person's got a medium RFC. What do you do if there's a conflict between what you think, what the doctor thinks? Are you required to follow what the doctor says? Can you contest that? What would happen in that situation?
It doesn't happen often, but yes, we have an arbitration process. So if we see something that we feel like is completely off the wall, we can consult with that doctor and say, did you see this right here? You did see this x-ray, right? You did see this note from their psychologist or this inpatient admit for psychiatric. We can dialogue with the doctors, with our doctors, certainly. If typically they're not wrong, it's been very rare that we've seen that. And that's where the reconsideration process comes into play. You get a fresh set of eyes. That claim is not assigned to the same adjudicator. It will not be assigned to the same doctors to review. And usually we will try to, if we need a consultative exam, we will try to assign to a different panelist, one of our contracted doctors. So it is a completely fresh set of eyes across the board, fresh sets of eyes, I should say, to alleviate that in case the first doctor got it wrong. But yeah, there've been times where I've kind of questioned and tipped my head to the side and said, I don't know that I agree with this one. And yes, we have an arbitration process that we can get another doctor to look at it. We do have doctors and psychologists who are kind of the directors of the doctors. They have the most seniority. They do a fantastic job. Sometimes we'll go through them and say, really would like this to have another look. And we'll explain why, not just look at everything again, but here's what I'm seeing. But they are MDs and PhDs, and they really do have the training, and they know what they're looking for. They've been trained in this process, and most of them are really, really good. It's very rare that's happened, but it's happened, and we'll advocate for our claimants.
Let's talk about the forms a little bit, because again, this is part of the package, I guess, that the specialists, the doctors that look at the files get. How important are the forms? What are the mistakes you see people making on the forms? Does it make a difference if they're handwritten versus typed? Give me a sense of how important the forms are and kind of what you look for.
I'm glad you asked. They're important. The function report or the ADLs, there's Social Security assigns a number to it.
Those who don't know, ADLs, activities of daily living.
Yes, sorry. That's how most doctors will refer to it. I believe the form that's sent to claimants says function report across the top. So I try to use that language with claimants so they're not confused about what are ADLs, what are you talking about? Those are pretty important. And the work history forms are important for folks who are filing initial, especially if you are over the age of 50, because that's going to become important when we're coming down to residual functional capacity and transferability of job skills. But if your adjudicator says, we need you to fill this out, fill it out. Please fill it out and return it. It does not matter if it's typed or handwritten. I would say, yes, be thorough and answer the questions. Don't feel like you have to write your life history. This is not meant to be the end all be all of every symptom that you're experiencing. But it kind of covers the gamut of physical and mental. You'll notice on those forms, it'll ask questions about, do you need reminders to take your medications? Do you need reminders to shower? And that's not always related to physical ability. That's kind of showing us mental ability too. If you've got to be reminded to brush your hair every day and change your clothes, that's kind of telling. We have folks that says, if you're able to drive, do you drive? And the next question a lot of people miss, if not, why? That can be because of your vision. That can be because you had a bad accident and that's too traumatic and anxiety inducing for you. Could be because you have seizures and your neurologist has prohibited you from driving. So definitely answer that question of why. It gives a lot of information, but it is a snapshot. Ultimately, we're still relying on medical records. We do need the function report, because again, that shows a claimant's willingness to cooperate with the process. If you are not willing to complete that form, a questionnaire, and mail it back to me, why then would we spend the money on a consultative exam at government expense? So it's really, we're trying to see, are you going to cooperate with the process? And we have to have that functional information. There are a number of Social Security listings that have not only the objective component, that what the medical record says, but also the functional component. How does this affect the patient or claimant day to day? Other questionnaires that are important are the seizure questionnaire. So if you have a history of seizures, that should be sent to you as well. And the vision questionnaire. If you have any history of low vision, vision loss, any vision limitations, the vision questionnaire is important. Often some agencies will not schedule an ophthalmological consultative exam if the claimant does not return that vision questionnaire. Even if the function report was returned, that vision questionnaire is really important if that's sent to you.
One of the things I always tell folks, because again, in my practice, obviously people get the forms and I've got videos. I personally don't feel comfortable. People say, well, you fill out the form for me. And I'm like, that's no, because that's, in my opinion, that's evidence. I think that needs to come from the claimant.
Absolutely.
But what I do tell them is when you fill out the form, be very specific. So don't say, I can't lift very much. It's 10 pounds or 5 pounds, or I can't walk, 100 feet or whatever. You got to be very specific, but trying to, stay away from the vague, not very much, not very far. Correct?
I've had I don't know written
Mhm.
in some of the short answer responses, and that's not helpful.
Mhm.
That doesn't tell us anything. Who better to tell us about your conditions than you? Now, I
Yep.
understand for some claimants, it's difficult to understand or difficult to complete. If that's the case, please ask a friend or family member to help you, or your representative, or call your adjudicator. But it is so important. Those forms are important, even if you just check some boxes and get it back, and you're not able to be very detailed. At least comply with that part of the process. Without it, we cannot order consultative exams.
Yeah. I mean, what I tell people is, obviously, as you said, it's a snapshot. When you're filling out the form and it asks you about, let's say, physically, how much you can lift, how long you can stand, how much you can carry, and so forth. Don't answer it as if it's the worst day ever. But let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, it's an average to slightly below average day. And that, I think is a fairly good representation of what's going on, because, I had a case just the other day where my client had an epidural, and for about a week, she felt great. And then it wore off. Well, if
Mm-hmm.
you fill out the form based on the day you feel really, really good, that's not an accurate representation. The same token, if you have a day where you're just completely, the barometric pressure is low, whatever the reason, you had food poisoning, that's not an accurate day either. But I think an average to slightly below average day is a pretty good way, at least for my mind, to look at it.
Oh, that
Make
makes
sense?
sense. I mean, there's many of these conditions. The degree to which it limits you can vary day to day. Hopefully not every day is your worst day, but I think it would be fine to say, on a good day I can do this, on a bad day I can only do this. The other thing that is interesting is the discrepancy sometimes, and we're not looking, it's not a gotcha, but I have had claimants say I can only walk a few feet on their function report. Valid, that's
Mhm.
might be the case. But then a medical record comes in, and being in this role, I'm surprised how much information medical records
Mhm.
contain. Not every doctor does this, but some doctors will note that you told them you just went on a cruise with your family, or you
Mhm.
just went to Disney World with your family. That's not a little bit of walking. That's not someone
Mhm.
who's really inactive. Everyone should live their life. Absolutely. I don't think because you are struggling with a condition that you should have to be isolated in your house. But when your function report is telling us I can only walk 5 feet, or I can't walk at all, and you're telling your doctor we just did a tour of Europe where we walked everywhere, that's kind of conflicting. That
Right.
does stand out, and it's part of your record. So
Yeah.
be honest, don't exaggerate. It will
Right.
come out.
Yeah, I've seen the one thing that always has gotten a couple of my clients, motorcycles, for whatever reason. You know, if there's a motorcycle, and this happens at hearings, and it happens at the adjudication level as well. Well, whatever reason, riding a motorcycle seems very inconsistent with, you know, significant back problems and functional limitations. In fact, I had a case that was denied. My client owned a motorcycle. She swears up and down that she doesn't ride it, but this was something that she worked really hard to get, and she just likes to look at it. Judge didn't buy it. And,
Oh, wow.
so yeah, I mean, you got to be real careful about that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think what you're saying is you got to really explain, if you're doing something that seems a little bit inconsistent with the medical record. Again, I've had people, you talk about the cruise, I've had people tell me, my adult daughter took me to Europe. After the plane trip, it took me 3 or 4 days to recover. And then I was, in the hotel room, and I did very little sightseeing. It was always from a bus. That's a whole lot different than walking, 5 miles a
Right.
day, up and down hills. So I guess you have to explain that. But,
Well, not necessarily. I mean, the medical record is going to tease that out. So if
mhm,
you're visiting your orthopedist and, hey, we just got back from Disney World, it was a great time, and the orthopedist does their exam and notes that you have very painful range of motion in your knee or your joints, that's going, and maybe your imaging shows that you're bone on bone in your
mhm,
knees. Well, then that speaks louder than, than the subjective information. But yeah, when it can also be clear in medical records that someone is very active. They're physically very active. I've had claimants say that they're very disabled and in a lot of pain, but tell their doctor that they go to the gym and they're doing a lot of strength training. That's inconsistent.
mhm,
So I don't want to tell people, and please hear me,
mhm.
be honest with your physician. For goodness sakes, please be honest with your physician. Um, but don't exaggerate things. I think it would be I think that's a great idea that you point out, Jonathan, to
Mhm.
say, it varies. On a good day, I might be able to walk a mile, but on a bad day, I can barely get down my stairs to my kitchen. I think that's okay to say that on that function report because conditions vary. And we're
All
really looking at, as you said, most of the time. How are
right.
you
Mhm.
doing most of the time?
And another question just popped in my mind because people are going
Yeah.
to ask me this: medical marijuana. How does the state agency look at medical marijuana? Is it dependent on the state, or is it something that is a universal policy in Social Security?
The number of individuals who are using marijuana medically or recreationally is surprising. It's a
Mhm,
lot of people, a lot of
mhm.
people. Um, it's not something that we flag or look at favorably or unfavorably. It just is kind of where we are. It's at this point really viewed no differently than someone having drinks on the weekend.
Okay.
If it's something that is an addiction or a dependency, a doctor is going to note that, and that's different. That doesn't mean we deny someone for it, but it can speak to maybe a mental health condition. And even if somebody is using marijuana recreationally or to help ease pain or to cope with pain, if a doctor then diagnoses that individual with that could be a substance addiction is the way the doctor is viewing it, well then that becomes a piece of the mental health picture. It's not a reason to deny someone, but it could be that there is something undiagnosed that we have not explored or looked at, and we will if we see if someone is coming to us saying that they have very severe orthopedic conditions. We see in their medical records that they're using marijuana for pain relief. Maybe the doctor has said that's crossed over into substance addiction. Well, then that becomes a mental health component of your claim, and we're going to look at that not unfavorably, but simply as part of the overall picture. Would this limit you? Is there some condition that has not been diagnosed that would limit you further from returning to your work?
Okay. Okay. I want to ask, and again, I want to finish up because we do want to get through the process, but as you're talking, questions are popping in my head.
Sure.
Objective evidence, is it? My sense is that cases where the medical issue can be objectively observed through an MRI, through an ultrasound, through a CT, that those are inherently going to be stronger cases than ones that is all subjective, like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, CRPS, things like that. Agree or disagree?
It's difficult. It's case by case, is what the agency would say. It truly is case by case. Um, a lot of that's going to depend on the subjective information, a claimant's functional information, but also medical exams. Doctors will note what trigger points are active on someone with
Mhm.
fibromyalgia. CRPS can have lots of medical records, even though we might not be able to see that on an image. Your medical records are going to show that this is an ongoing painful issue for you, and
Mhm.
your functional information is going to show that it's limiting you. So it's a little bit trickier because we don't just have that nice clear MRI that shows us exactly what's going on, or the lab findings that show us exactly what's going on. But the medical information is going to show how much this is restricting you.
Okay. Okay. I mean, again, I will say most of those cases, they typically are not going to be. I don't see them getting approved so much at the initial recon. They will go to a hearing, and again, it's kind of a crapshoot with the judges. Some judges just really don't buy into fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue or things like that because it's not objective, and some judges are more open to it, but that's just, that's just the nature of the beast, I guess.
Unfortunate. Yes.
Okay. You answered this question before, and when you and I were talking briefly, and you kind of touched on it before about computer access, social media. Should people be concerned about their social media profiles? Should they put them on private? Are those things that Social Security looks at?
From a personal standpoint, your social media should be private. I say that just as that's my own personal opinion. But it's not something that we can access. It's not something that we look at. We're looking at your functional information that you're reporting to us in your physician and your medical records. So no, I can't access it from my laptop at all. So I don't think folks would need to change any of that just because they have a pending claim.
Got it. Although I will say I've had, and I'm not sure, but the judges, it may be a little different. I feel pretty certain in saying that I think that some judges are going to look at it because,
Wow.
again, that they're independent, so they can do what they want to do. But
that's true.
That's my sense. I'm going to have to ask a judge sometime. I don't know if they would even admit it. There's a retired judge, and I'm going to ask him. But I kind of get that sense. But
let me know what you find out. I'm curious to know.
People, and I'm going to get into CDRs in a second, but OIG. Are there situations where you would refer a case to the Inspector General because of concerns about fraud or something like that? What would trigger something like that in your mind?
Yeah, I can't speak to that, unfortunately. So I'll have to pass on that one.
Okay, fair enough. And let's talk about CDRs. Do you deal with CDRs?
Yes, continuing disability review claims. So these are claimants who have already been found disabled under Social Security guidelines. The question that I get many times from just about everyone when I call them is, why are you calling me? What's going on? But I was found disabled. Under Social Security guidelines, there are review diaries set on every claim that is found disabled. Some of those are based completely on the listing. So if, just say, an easy one is organ transplantation. Under Social Security guidelines, that is an automatic 1 year. You were found disabled for 1 year post date of transplant. There is a 1 year review diary set. That does not mean your claim is going to be reviewed in 12 months. As we mentioned, there is a backlog. It could be 7 years. It is really random, the timeline. We get claimants who were found disabled under low birth weight. We have a baby who weighed under 1,200 grams at birth. There is a set review diary for that, but sometimes we don't get those claims until the child is 5 years old. So at that point, we are looking at, for example, low birth weight. Obviously, a 5-year-old does not weigh under 1,200 grams anymore. But typically, a child born that small, that premature, they're going to have residual conditions. So we're looking at everything at that point. What we're looking at in the CDR process is, has there been significant medical improvement? And folks sort of cringe and they get nervous about that. If you are 35 years old and you have already had significant spinal conditions, that's not going to get better in 5 to 10 years. On the other hand, if you had a stroke or you had a heart attack and you were not doing well at all when you were found disabled, but you've recovered really well since then, in the 5 to 10 years since then, maybe there was significant medical improvement. We are not only looking at the condition for which you were found disabled, we are looking at everything. So we start by looking at, you were initially found disabled for post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. We are initially looking at your mental status now. Has there been significant medical improvement? If it appears there has been, then we pull back and look at the bigger picture. Well, you're 55 years old and you were found disabled for PTSD in your 20s, but now at 55, there's probably other things going on. Probably your joints are not in as good a shape as they were in your 20s. Might have some neurologic stuff going on. Maybe you're diagnosed with diabetes. Maybe you have glaucoma. So there are a number of other conditions, but at that point, if we don't see that, or if we see that there has been significant medical improvement on a CDR claim, then we pull back and we look at the bigger picture. What else is going on?
Now, how would you find out that there's been improvement? I mean, I realize, let me ask it this way. I know there are two forms, the short form and the long form for CDRs. Are those sent out randomly? Is that based on the diary? Why would somebody get a short form versus a long form if you know?
What do you mean by short form, long form? Do you mean the
Well,
454?
well, there's the 454 and the 455. One of them is like 5 questions, and the other one's got kind of a long, list of questions.
The we I have not seen a 455. I've seen the 454. That's typically
Okay.
what we receive with a CDR claim. And that's just a chance for you to report the doctors that you've seen for the conditions that you have, whatever you're receiving treatment for. Update your contact information, please, please, please. Cannot state that enough. We will send that function report with CDR claims typically, just because that 454 still doesn't give a lot of information. It's really checking yes or no. And there's a section for someone to list more information. Most people don't. It kind of depends on other factors, whether or not we need the ADLs, but we will send those just so we have that information. And I think I forgot your question. Oh, why some get the...
Yeah, why do some? I mean, and again, there's a short form. I guess that's the 455, which is literally 5 questions. And what I was led to believe is that essentially that's triggered if they see earnings. They start to see earnings. And if you answer basically, I've not worked, the doctor's not telling me there's any improvement, it's kind of mechanical. And if it's all no, then basically a human being doesn't even see it. And they pretty much say, we're not going to do anything further. But again, my understanding was that randomly, there are people either because they're diaried or randomly will get the longer form, and those questions have to be filled out. And so I guess my question is, you've got the 827. Are you requesting medical records before you even send out the form, or is the form sent out by somebody other than the state agency? Who's sending out the forms, I guess, is the first question.
So for CDR claims, those are the 45. I have not seen a 455. I wrote that down to find out what this is. The 454 is sent out by field office. So when we get a claim, that is something either it was completed electronically or by hand. So that is something that is in the claim. For claims that are mine diaries, so that is medical improvement not expected. Typically, those are claimants who are older or have a condition that is not expected to improve. Field office will not send out the 454 because it is expected that this claimant's going to remain on disability. However, the agency still has to determine if significant medical improvement has occurred. But yeah, I have not seen a 455, so I'm gonna have to look at what.
I'm
what
looking at one right now. Yeah, it's basically just a very, very short form. It's 2 pages, and if you just type in SSA 455, and it basically asks for the address. Have you worked in the last 2 years? Check the box. Is your health better, the same, or worse within the last 2 years? Has your doctor told you can return to work? Yes or no? Within the last 2 years, have you attended any school? I mean, it's like 7 questions. Again, my understanding is that that it's machine graded, and that if basically the answer is all pretty much no change, then that's kind of where it stops.
This has got to be some kind of screening that doesn't become a part of the. I have never seen this form. I've pulled it up on my device, and that is strange. No, I have never seen this form in someone's claim, so that's really weird.
Well, but again, from my world, the issue with the CDRs is that when people, let's say they get a review and then they're told that their Social Security is moving for termination, they can obviously file a request for reconsideration, and they can eventually get a hearing on it. The problem is that Social Security says to them, if you want your benefits to continue while this is being evaluated, fill this form in or check this box or whatever. If they do that, they get their benefits continue while they appeal. The problem is they can't get a lawyer, because I get paid a percentage of past due benefits. If they elect to have benefits continue, no past due benefits. So they're sort of in this position where if they want to get a lawyer, they've got to let their benefits stop, and then they still have to find a lawyer. Or if they say, I want my benefits to continue, the only way to get a lawyer would be to stroke a check for several $1,000s. So it put a lot of people get really, and again, a lot of my viewers get very, very stressed out about this because they never have to do it themselves. Yeah, it's a real. I don't know the solution to that.
Yeah, that'd probably be why. Excuse me. I don't think I've ever seen a representative on a pre-hearing claim. So at the initial level, excuse me, when you filed for appeal, that's called reconsideration, because they're reconsidering the decision. At the CDR level, excuse me, so sorry. That's the pre-hearing level. So it's not we don't use the term recon or reconsideration, but it's pre-hearing. But yeah, that would explain why I don't see attorney representatives on pre-hearing claims.
Yep.
Well, that really stinks.
It's an issue. And, like I said, you have a lot of people, and I suspect the judges are not real fond of, pro se claimants appearing in hearings because, again, this is probably something you would have no reason to, have to deal with. But once a hearing is requested, there's no state agency to update the medical records. So the issue that you run into is if somebody tries to represent themselves at a hearing, they wouldn't necessarily know to update the medical record.
Oh,
They get to a
goodness.
hearing and the last record is 8 or 9 months old, you get a judge who's not real happy about it. But again, they have no attorney because they can't find anybody. So again, it's just a flaw in the system. I don't know what the solution is, but that is definitely an issue.
Yeah, it is.
All right, let me ask a couple more questions. And I want to get to some of the questions. People have been very patiently waiting and posting questions. But just kind of big picture, are there certain if you can answer this, maybe you can't answer or don't feel comfortable answering, are there certain types of medical issues that tend to lend themselves to more of an early approval versus ones that, your sense is they probably going to have to go to a judge?
If something is listing level, and that's something that is available online, that's public domain. Although
Right.
I understand the language of those listings is difficult to understand if you've not been through training or you're not a medical doctor. Yes.
I've actually, by the way, I have a website called metalisting.com.
Okay.
Where I link to the listings and I give, some explanations about how they work and some case studies. And I've also got a site called gridrules.net, same sort of thing where I explain how it works and some case studies. So
I should probably bookmark your grid rules site because the vocational pieces, we do have vocational specialists. I'm not the one working on the vocational portion of claims, just to ease everyone's minds. But yes, the vocational piece is tricky, to say the least. If someone meets a listing, if their listings level, that claim is usually going to come in with some kind of flag on it. We have a system that it is a web-based system that we can use for reading medical records and for searching medical records. That system will put flags in claims. So if a new claims comes across my workload, or I've had this claim, but a piece of medical evidence comes in, if a record comes in from a hospital, that system will alert me and say, hey, this particular claimant might need a listing, might want to open this medical record real quick. And if that's the case, we jump on that. We get that to our doctors. We don't want to wait on that. As for conditions that would pretty quickly beat listings, organ transplantation comes to mind.
Yep. I know you see, I'm sure you see a lot of back pain cases, a lot of depression, anxiety, PTSD cases. And again, just, law of numbers, in my experience, I will tell you is that, back pain, the listing for musculoskeletal was changed a few years ago. It's very hard to meet. You really have to be almost not able to walk to meet that. So I rarely see those. Again, the ones that I see get approved early, obviously cancer, any sort of compassionate allowance or, Terry case, things like that. But and really, I'd say the age is a big factor. People over 55, those can be. Which actually leads me to another question. I'm coming
sure.
to these questions. We see a number of situations, and it happens quite frequently. Somebody is approved, but they change the onset date to, let's say they applied and they alleged an onset date that were 52. They're approved as of age 55.
Which I have to ask, why in the world did that take that long? But it does. So carry on.
Well, or maybe they filed and they said, I became disabled a year and a half ago, based on the application. But my point is that the alleged onset date may be age 52 or 53, but the actual approval date, because they presumably meet a grid rule at age 55, is that something that the agency is there a official policy or unofficial policy to try to move these dates forward, or is this just something that because the evidence is just that's what it shows?
No, and that's a very good question. I'm sure on the claimant's end, it probably seems like, wow, that really stinks. It's like they're trying to, make this as least favorable as possible. We actually are trying to make things as favorable as possible. In fact, we have a policy that if your filing overlaps a previously filed claim where you were found disabled. And I have had a claimant that this has happened with before, more than one, where the system will trigger us to say, this is overlapping. You need to reopen the prior file. It's possible the claimant met the listing and was found disabled prior to the file date or the eligibility date for the current claim. So that is when we will have a medical reopening, and we will make that prior file part of the current. And we might even back up the claim, the onset date, prior to what you thought you were disabled. And we've had others where there just isn't medical evidence. A lot of folks put off going to the doctors, and maybe really are just fighting to get through the pain. And I'm working and gotta pay a mortgage, gotta support my family. I'm in a lot of pain. I don't have time to go to the doctor. I don't have the money to go to the doctor. And by the time you go to the doctor, holy cow, there's there's a lot going on. Stage 4 lung cancer or any number of things. But if we don't have those records,
you can't do
I can't prove that was. Now there is a timeline where our doctors will back up. We can assume if you had stage 4 cancer in June,
right,
in March, you were probably not okay.
Right.
Even if you were working and still engaged in SGA, substantially gainful activity, that's a rule out for Social Security. Right. But if you were already not working at that point, it's fair to say, it's reasonable to assume, even if you saw no doctor from March until June when you had that CAT scan, that was terrifying CAT scan, it is reasonable to assume in March your condition would have affected your ability to work. Yeah. But yes, that age 50 and then age 55 are kind of those magic numbers where the vocational rule charts change significantly in the favor of a claimant. But we are always, and that is just SSA guidelines. In fact, we will get claims returned from federal quality assurance if they determine that we were wrong on the onset, and it needs to be backed up to be more favorable to the claimant. But SGA is kind of that dividing line. If you are working, if you're engaged in SGA, you're not eligible. You're not eligible for benefits. And to speak to something that I didn't earlier, what can delay a claim? It's that discovered work. If I see in your medical records, and unfortunately, some doctors will just copy over those social questions, the social history questions that you answered on your first visit with them. Works full time in a factory. Works full time in a factory. I can see that for years.
Yes.
And the same thing. But under our guidelines, we have to investigate that. We have to look into that. So if we can't get you on the phone to ask you about that, then we have to send an alert to the field office, and they will do that. And I've had claimants say, well, they've been trying to call me. I don't know why they're calling me. Please answer them. It's possible it's just a very, very simple misunderstanding that your doctor just copied that social history portion, but we have to address it if we see it in records. So
now, do you look at the earnings? I mean, because I know when I get a file, you can look in a section of the file. I think it's the B section. It'll show a certified earnings record or a summary. Do you have access to that, or is that not part of what you see?
We have queries that we run that we can see it. We can't see it to the extent that Social Security can. They deal a lot more with the numbers. And that's a good thing, because math is definitely not my favorite subject, but which is why, if we see discovered work, even if it's an error in your medical record, we have to send it to the field office to look into it. So we don't, but yeah, we see often, and I've had claimants, not often, but occasionally claimants will go to that consultative exam and tell the doctor, yeah, I returned to work full time last week. Oh no, I have to look into that. I have to get an answer for that, because we can't just send your claim on without getting an answer to that.
Okay. All right. I want to go to some questions.
Sure.
For those who have just tuned in, I'm talking to a state agency adjudicator. We're going to call her Linda. And Linda has been gracious enough to answer questions about the process. And now I want to ask or go through some of the questions that have kind of been piling up here.
And I appreciate everyone waiting. Thank you.
Yeah. No. Look, I mean, we really got a kind of a very nice history and a real lesson about how the process works. And a lot of it, look, it's black box to me, because I'm just seeing it from my end, and to actually hear what's going on. It's real. Look, I'm sure that, people, they get really angry because they get angry, talking to me or talking to my staff, because things take a really long time, and they feel like, nobody believes what they have to say. And look, we certainly know it's evidence-based, but, like you said, it's not uncommon where people don't have insurance, they don't have the money for the test, Look, what I tell people is lack of medical evidence for Social Security purposes essentially is lack of impairment. If you have no evidence, there you can't walk in and say I'm disabled or I've got a herniated disc if you don't have an MRI. Just you can't. I mean, it'd be nice that you could, but you can't. And so you've got to find a way to get to the doctor. Which actually, let me ask this. People, again, they don't have insurance. How often do they have? I mean, what is sufficient, if I can call it that, in terms of going to the doctor? Somebody is going twice a year sufficient, 4 times a year? I assume it depends on the medical condition, but somebody has no money at all. What can they do?
Honestly, that is not a factor, and it shouldn't be a factor, and it's not a factor. If your medical records, or you just don't have any, if your medical records are insufficient, if I have one of those persnickety practices that's not going to send me records unless we pay them, or they just aren't responding. Unfortunately, some office managers are not doing their jobs. If we just can't get the information, or the information doesn't exist because you've not been able to go to the doctor, we are going to schedule an exam. But that's where that function report's important, because if you have no medical records and you're just telling us, I've got a bad back and I've got bad knees, but you're not returning that function report to us, we have nothing to go on. I have no idea how that affects you. I don't know if I need to schedule an x-ray and an exam. So give us that information, even if you have no medical records and you've not been able to go to a doctor. And it's much more common than you think. Or folks go to a doctor they might go to their general practitioner, but general practitioner's been referring them for x-rays and orthopedists and physical therapy, and can't afford to go, can't afford to do it. So I'll keep going to my doctor for my blood pressure medication and my anxiety meds, but I can't afford to go to an orthopedist. And I understand it's expensive. It's expensive with insurance. So we will get that information. We will send you for an exam. We're not going to deny you just because lack of evidence is not lack of a condition. It's just what it is.
Again, I will tell you at the hearing stage, judges have said to me, I believe your client, but without evidence, I can't approve them. This is like, I have a case I'm working on, this week, and the person, it's taken they've gone to their GP, then they go, the insurance, will pay for physical therapy. Then they go to a different doctor who wants to do physical therapy. And then they get an epidural and it doesn't really work. And then they go to a different doctor who wants to go back to physical therapy. I mean, it can take a long time.
Pinball machine. Yeah.
It's very, very frustrating and
expensive.
Yeah, it's expensive. And they don't, I had one client say to me, look, my doctor wants to do a 4-level fusion. That's a $50,000 surgery, and I think the evidence, and that was part of my argument in my brief. You don't get a 4-level fusion is not discussed unless your back's pretty messed up. But they haven't had it, and the doctor's like, well, let's try maybe a radiofrequency ablation. Well, that's not going to solve the problem.
Right.
And look, a 4-level fusion might not solve the problem anyway, because that's a pretty invasive surgery. So,
and there are certain conditions for which, if you are not following medical advice, that a claim can be denied, because this would solution your disability, but you are not going to be denied because you cannot have the surgery done, or you're scared to have the surgery done, or you've maybe got a young child. I just can't have the downtime of a 4-level fusion. Yes, I'm hurting and I'm barely getting along, but after a 4-level fusion, you're really going to be down for a while. Hopefully you'll be better after that. But for a number of reasons, folks just can't do that. So that does not mean you're not disabled. It does not mean that you would not be found disabled. But yes, you're right.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, if a doctor is discussing that level of invasive procedure, life-altering procedure, that's not for nothing. That's a serious condition.
And along these lines, if somebody is suggested, let's say, a fusion or a surgery, and they choose not to do it because they're concerned about negative results or side effects, that's not held against them, is my understanding, based on some of the Social Security rulings. Correct.
It's a weird area. You are correct, but it's also a weird area. So it becomes convoluted. And as I said, there are certain conditions for which that is not considered, because this is a very routine medical procedure that would, almost certainly 98% reverse what is going on. But for financial reasons, or chance of the possibility of exacerbating some other condition. I mean, there's a number of times when folks are told you need this surgery, but I can't approve you for it. Your cardiologist might not approve you for it, or maybe you can't afford to go to the cardiologist for that, that stress test to clear you for surgery. So there's a number of barriers to having surgery done. Even though surgery might be the solution, it might not be feasible. So it's not held against someone. And, as you said, if your doctor's discussing that, that's serious. That is a serious condition, whatever it is.
Absolutely. What's your take on, and I think I know the answer to this, but people sometimes will go to a chiropractor, they go get acupuncture, they get massage therapy. These are not acceptable medical source. Whether it was an acceptable medical sources.
AMS, yes. So an acceptable medical source, and that's a Social Security guideline. It has to be an MD, a nurse practitioner, psychologist, psychiatrist. So it's a PhD or a PSYD. An EDD, a speech language pathologist, or a speech therapist is an acceptable medical source, but someone who is an MS, so a therapist, is not considered an acceptable medical source. So if you're a therapist who doesn't have a whole lot of letters after their name, you don't refer to them as doctor, they may have diagnosed you with PTSD or depression, but unless that diagnosis is coming from a psychologist, which might be a reason we send someone for a mental status exam. You may have been in therapy for 10 years, but if a medical doctor or a PhD has not diagnosed you with that condition under Social Security guidelines, we cannot accept that diagnosis. We would send you to one of our PhDs who can then do that. And given a medical history like that, it's not like our state psychologists are going to reverse course, but that is just the guidelines that we're held to. And it's not that we don't believe your diagnosis, but those are the guidelines from Social Security.
Right. And I see a lot of people that go to chiropractors, same sort of thing.
They're not medical doctors, right?
Not medical doctors, and they won't give them. I know, and people get really upset about that because, they feel like their chiropractors, they become friendly with the chiropractor and they get relief. But again, a diagnosis. I mean, what I always tell people is it shows you're seeking treatment, which is
exactly. And helpful. Chiropractors can give us good functional exams, but they're not under SSA guidelines, not an acceptable medical source.
Yep. Absolutely.
And they might be doing great things for you. And you're right. It is showing that you're receiving treatment.
I completely agree. All right. So let me go to a couple of the questions here. So we've got one gentleman, this is earlier this afternoon, basically one of my clients, and he posted a point to saying he got approved and he had some back issues and so forth. He just gave some suggestions about how to, use the resources that we provide, which I appreciate. So I'll say thank you to Calvin on that. All right. Kevin, interesting question. 59 years old, which certainly helps. Doctor prescribed a walking cane and said I need 2 knee surgeries in the left. What are my odds of going to an ALJ hearing, or should I get approved early? Cane, let's talk about the cane. I always got the sense that if somebody's prescribed a cane, that's pretty significant in that A, it obviously indicates they're having trouble walking. B, that you can't really do light work with a cane. Yes or no?
It depends on how frequently it's needed. A doctor prescribed cane is very different than going to Walgreens and picking up a cane. And if you need a cane, go to Walgreens and pick up a cane. That's fine. A doctor is going to note in your records that you came into the appointment with a cane, that you're walking with a limp and you need a cane. But when a doctor prescribes it, that is very different. That is medical treatment. As I said, anyone can go to Walgreens and pick up, I'm assuming, can pick up a cane, a knee brace, etc. But when it has been prescribed by a doctor as your treatment, and that's been deemed medically necessary, that is very different. I can't speak to the ALJs. I know, Jonathan, you've said it's somewhat of a crapshoot when you get to that point because they're not doctors. That process is I'm kind of removed from that process.
Right.
I read their decisions, but I don't know what those hearings look like and what takes place. But if a doctor has said you need 2 knee surgeries, it depends on, and you're 59 years old. There's still some factors there. I think it would depend on what kind of knee surgery. Is it an ACL tear, or is it bone on bone degenerative joint disease and you need a whole replacement? And then at 59 years old, what are other factors? So there are other conditions that we would look at. Is there mental health? Have you ever been prescribed anything for a sleep aid because you have insomnia? Insomnia can kind of point to anxiety. And I don't know anyone who has had ongoing medical conditions that doesn't have some form of anxiety or depression, whether or
Yeah.
not it's been diagnosed and treated. I mean, that just wears on you. It does. So, and I know gentlemen tend to underreport,
Yeah.
and I
Sure.
think a certain generation tends to underreport mental health.
Yep.
And I understand that, but that is, that definitely tells a bigger story. If you have physically limiting conditions, you might still be able to do sedentary work. But if you are mentally restricted, if you've
Yep.
got severe insomnia, anxiety, depression, that starts to erode your ability to do a desk job, because
Yeah.
most desk jobs are on a computer. It's using your brain. It's so that starts to affect that ability. So I would be sure you're reporting everything to your adjudicator. I know
Mhm.
that sometimes it can seem like the alligator closest to the boat is what I'm seeing the doctor about the most and what's hurting me the most, but definitely let your adjudicator know what other conditions you're being treated for, even if it was in the past, especially for mental health and cardiac, because we go all the way back to get records for those. So if you
Yep.
were treated for anxiety in your 20s and you currently are on, a low antidepressant, a low dose antidepressant because you're just worn out from the pain, that is important. And that's important to let your adjudicator know. And it impacts your ability to return to work.
Yeah. Well, look, at the hearing level, I will tell you, people over 55, I've never seen, I don't know if the statistics are available or even, that they're making them available to us, but I mean, the approval, overall at hearings, according to, they call it the waterfall chart, it's about 49-50% of cases that go to hearings are approved. I would guess people over 55, that's probably closer to 70%, because judges would generally assume you're at a hearing, you need two knee surgeries, whether it's you know, just a total knee replacement or an ACL tear. You're not going to be standing up for 6 hours a day, and you're going to be in pain. And you've got to have a cane, so you're going to be probably limited to sedentary work at best. With a certain level of pain or medications, that's going to eliminate. It's going to pretty much leave you at unskilled work. You meet the grids, and so those cases are ones that I see they get approved all day long, because again,
And
that's just what judges typically will do. Um,
and 59 with a knee replacement is
yeah,
great. That might, you might be running a marathon next year,
yeah,
or I don't know.
yeah,
But typically other joints are not at their peak. If you were 30 years old and
yeah,
you were walking with a cane and you needed two knee surgeries, there's a good chance, depending on what happened, what's going on, what your diagnosis is, there's a good chance you're going to recover from that and be able to be pretty mobile.
hmm,
But at 59, other parts of our bodies start to break
yeah,
down and wear out. So
yeah.
that's definitely what the ALJs are looking at, and SSA. I mean, that's why we look at everything.
Okay. All right. Here's a question, and again, this is probably beyond what you probably don't deal with this sort of thing. I can answer it. Ron wants to know: is an SSDI 52, will his amount change when he gets full retirement? I think it just goes to a different trust fund. The amount doesn't really change because SSDI is roughly equal to full retirement, Ron. So I think that you wouldn't see much of a change there. Um, Okay. RB says received a letter from OHO, which is the hearing office, need current medication list, recent doctor's appointments, and signed form, probably the 827. Lawyer stated only mail signed form for SSA. Are these pretty standard? Yeah, these are pretty standard. There's when they request a hearing, they send you certain forms, medication list, work history form, recent medical treatment. That's very, very standard. And as far as what you should expect, that if anything they need, but those are typically what they need at the hearing level. Okay, here's an adjudication question. SA says, when an adjudicator finally starts getting medical records, are you alerted as a lawyer to, and then you start gathering that patient's medical records yourself? Okay, so this is a question really for me, and I think that Linda has sort of answered this, that, when I'm representing person early on, we now have access to their files at initial and recon, so I can see if a file is being worked. But what Linda is telling us is um, that it's probably better to let Social Security request those medical records, because what they don't want at the state agency is a bunch of papers kind of flying in that are not really a complete record. Is that correct?
It is correct. And
Yeah,
there's sometimes overlap. So
yeah,
I've requested medical records, and then I might get something that's got part of another record we already have. Maybe it's a few months in the middle, or there might be an operation report that's in there, or some physical therapy, and it's just sort of all over the place. But we have to look at them. We have to review them. So it kind of can slow things down. Again, if there is something that we just can't get, we are going to reach out to you. A good adjudicator is going to reach out to you and say, I cannot get this source. I cannot get this. Your cardiologist will not send me your records.
Yeah. So again, I think what the message is that, when you talk to your doctors and let them know you're filing for disability. And I always tell people, when you're talking to your doctors, let them know this is not a decision you came to lightly, that you'd much rather be working, but you had no choice, but you're doing this, and please cooperate, because, not sending in records just causes more delay. So, I would tell people to encourage their doctors early on. Don't wait until there's a problem. Just let them know early on you're going to get something from Social Security. Please respond to it.
And the doctor is not the one sending the records. It's
Yeah.
typically, so I'm saying
Copy
don't
service,
blast your doctors,
Right.
but they are, it's someone in office management. But sometimes I've heard the hang up is the doctor has to sign off on it. We've pulled it together. We have the request, but the doctor has to sign it. They're
Yep.
busy. I understand practicing medicine is not getting less
Easy.
busy,
Yep.
but sometimes that's the hang up, is that for whatever reason, in a practice, the doctor has to sign off before those can be sent.
Yeah. And I think, look, for doctors, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but many doctors use copy services that cost them money, and the copy services adds on to the price. Well, Social Security is paying a whopping $20. I would
Exactly.
suspect that many doctors are probably losing money providing records. So, they're not real happy about it, because
Wow.
their bottom lines are not what they used to be. Back when I was going to college, people who go to medical school, they say it was for humanitarian reasons. It was for the money. Honestly, I think some of them I knew that was for the money. But the point is that nowadays, doctors they're under a lot of pressure. I mean, their fee schedules, insurance companies don't want to pay them, and they got to come out of pocket. Look, I have a friend of mine, one of my a fellow I went to college with, or he's a couple years older than me, and I inherited his apartment. He's a doc. He became a concierge doctor. He's like, I don't want to mess with insurance. We'll give you the paperwork. I don't have people on my staff that fill out these forms. You want the records? I'll give them to you, but we're not, dealing with all the insurance nonsense.
I think more and more doctors are going to begin going to that,
Yeah.
because they're just fatigued with
Yeah.
having insurance dictate how they practice medicine.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other soapbox.
It is. No, look, I mean, I see it, again, in my practice, and, the insurance companies are, no, we won't pay for this. The doctor says they need, this type of injection, a knee injection or whatever. No, we're not paying for it. And so, but they'll pay for a knee replacement, but they won't pay for a gel injection. Makes no sense, but that's what they do. So
I
anyway.
completely agree.
Okay. All right. Laura asks, will SSA ask for a list from my pharmacy to make sure I'm refilling my medications? Using a pharmacy that went out of business. Linda, what's your take on that?
Wow, that's a great question. Really, the only condition that we really request pharmacy records for is epilepsy, seizures, because medical compliance can be a game changer when someone has epilepsy. If you're not taking your medications routinely, you're not getting them filled. And that's, if we can't get it from pharmacy records, and I mentioned earlier the authorization to release records for two of the biggest pharmaceutical companies, or pharmacies in the United States, Walgreens and CVS, they have to have a wet signed authorization to release records. A lot of folks are signing the e-signed authorization at Form 827. If we can't get pharmacy records, your neurologist records, they pull labs. That's going to indicate what levels of the medication are in your system. And that's why your neurologist is taking labs, is they're making sure that you're being compliant with treatment. They don't want to jack up your Keppra if you're not taking it. So we will use it to see for seizures. Typically, that's the only condition for which we'll request pharmacy records.
Okay. Well, what about medication side effects in general? Is that something that moves the meter at the adjudication level?
Absolutely. In fact, my very first claim that I had when I came out of training was someone who it was looking at all of the factors, the whole picture. This was an individual who had asthma, moderately severe, but being controlled with medications. And for anyone who has asthma, a lot of the medications you take, or some of the medications you take, can cause you to be jittery. Anxiety. So this individual was in that 55 plus category. didn't meet an asthma listing, which requires like hospital admits of 48
Right.
hours or more
Yeah,
every
right.
however many months. Asthma was definitely affecting their ability to work. But the other picture was the asthma medication. So I'm taking these medications so I can breathe and not end up in the hospital, but I'm a jittery mess. Well, that is taken into consideration. So yes, medication side effects, they make you drowsy or groggy. You're not going to be operating machinery. Um, Individuals who've had seizures are obviously not going to be operating machinery if they've had a seizure within 6 months. And yeah, we do look at those side effects.
Okay. Yeah, no,
And that's
look, I do it all. I mean, at hearings, that's, really a big part of, I'm not say a big part, but it's something I include in almost every pre-hearing brief is medication side effects. Because if somebody's on oxycodone, they're on hydrocodone, they're in Percocet, they're a Neurontin, which is known for causing, they call it gabapentin, Neurontin. Again, what it does, it doesn't necessarily disable the person, but it may eliminate transferability of skills.
exactly. And we
You
see
know?
that with patients who've been under chemotherapy, had chemotherapy treatment. I
Yeah.
hear about chemo fog and chemo brain, and
Right.
maybe your cancer is in remission, but you're foggy. I mean, that's hard to regain. So while you might physically be improved and maybe work that's physically strenuous might be easier to return to, you can't return to a desk job if you're in a mental fog from medications or chemotherapy. So yes, it's not something adjudicators, and we are looking for those pieces when we look through your records, but our doctors are very keyed into
Okay.
that. They definitely are versed in that and are looking at that and considering it.
How are you looking at COVID cases, long COVID vaccines? Is there any policy or
Yes,
anything you can tell me
we
about that?
see it not as much as we did early on. We used to every claim, if we saw COVID at all as a diagnosis, we had to put a COVID flag on it. And I think SSA finally realized pretty much everyone in the United States has had COVID at this point.
Right.
So but it was early on, and this was it's a new virus. We were all learning how is this affecting people? No one knew. But we were flagging it because we did not know how this was affecting people long term. I don't see long COVID. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I was seeing it pretty regularly. I mean, at least a couple of claims a week a few years ago when we were
Mhm.
still really in the thick of it. But yeah, that's something that I know people are still being treated for and dealing with is the COVID long haulers.
Yep. Yep. I mean, I see that, and what my experience has been that that if it affects the breathing, if it affects them in terms of their heart function, those are the same things that seem to move the meter more with Social Security than some of the other factors. Actually, I've had a couple of cases where people had really bad reactions to the COVID vaccine.
Goodness.
Um, and I've won a couple of cases on that where there's a couple places in the country that specialize in treating people who've had bad reactions to the vaccine, but it can be pretty brutal if you just react wrong to it, and it does happen to some people, unfortunately. Um, I'll look a couple of conditions. Let me just ask you about this. I'm thinking about it. Lyme disease. That's another one I find is very difficult because it's just really hard to pin down specifically what the functional issues are or how to evaluate the severity of it. Do you see many Lyme cases?
I have not. It doesn't mean that they don't exist and
Mhm.
that someone wouldn't be approved. I personally have not seen Lyme, and I am in an area where there's Lyme.
Yeah.
The ticks are out and it is transmitted, but I've seen other conditions, other tick-borne illnesses mentioned. Typically, it's part of the allegation, so there are other allegations there.
Okay.
But yeah, Lyme disease, my understanding is that's something that um, you can have exacerbations. You can have periods where it's more in remission. It never goes away, if I'm correct in that. Again, I haven't seen it in the medical records for any
Yeah,
of my claimants.
I haven't had too many. I've had a few, and again, if it doesn't get treated pretty quickly, it can kind of settle in and really become a problem. The issue that you run into is you've got to find a person who is a Lyme specialist. You can't go to your family doctor, and there's not a lot of specialists out there that try the different antibiotic treatments and things like that. So it can be a challenging claim. But I've had a couple of people with really severe Lyme, and yeah, I've got them approved because they, but I've had people that just sort of incidentally mention it, doesn't really do too much, but severe, yeah, that those are viable. Everybody, I just want to let everybody know we've got about 10 more minutes or so, so we're going to kind of zoom through some of these. This is an interesting question. I'm just going to kind of quickly just touch on this. And this kind of goes a little bit to what Linda's telling us. Eunice is 54 years old, worked as a sailor, has a slip disc, which again is not a medical term. So I'm guessing it's either a bulging disc or a disc herniation, knee pain. Then he says he can't lift more than 50 pounds. My first reaction is 50 pounds is a lot of weight. And, if that's your limitation, that you can't lift 50 pounds, there are probably a lot of jobs you could do that wouldn't be a sailor job necessarily, but there's a lot of jobs out there that you're going to need more than 50-pound lifting restriction. My take. Would you agree?
Yes. So 50-pound lift limit would be a medium restriction or medium residual functional capacity. And that's 50 occasionally, 25 frequently. Stand and walk for 6 of an 8-hour day is what that breaks down to. I think a lot of folks, when filing for Social Security disability, are thinking in terms of the job that they have or the job they've done most often. And Social Security's view is there other work you could adjust to? And that age, where age becomes important, and education level. And I'm not talking about PhDs and masters. I'm talking about high school education, or have you completed high school or not? And then that's where other conditions are going to come into play. So I know that you're thinking it's your back and knee are your main conditions, but are there other conditions? Have you, if this is the work that you've been doing for most of your working life, it's possible that there's maybe some wrist, arm conditions going on. Is there anything mental health? Is there any cardiac condition going on that you've been treated for? So that is where our agency looks at the big picture. What else is there going on that might further restrict your ability to work? I know that you're thinking, I wake up in the morning and go to bed at night and my back and my knee are killing me. But are there other things that your doctor has treated you for? And when we start narrowing that down, maybe you can't do work that requires you to lift 50 pounds. Could you do work where maybe you're lifting 25 pounds? Oh, well, no, because the doctor said that your elbow, you've got tendonitis or carpal tunnel, capsulitis of your shoulder, or torn ligaments. Maybe that's a sedentary job. That might be a desk job. That's the only job that we could return you to. But that's where we start to look at other conditions. So is there mental health? Has someone completed high school? If you haven't completed high school, the chance of being able to do sedentary work is pretty low because most of that's on a computer, and most of those jobs would require a high school degree. The question about working while you've applied or working during the process, that comes up a lot, and folks feel really scared to tell me that they're working. That is where those SGA charts come in, and that is publicly available. Substantially gainful activity. That is Social Security's kind of their line. You can work and earn up to this amount per month and still be eligible for disability. And I've had claimants who work at McDonald's 9 hours a week, but that's all they can handle. Their bodies cannot take more than that. And that's fine. You can still be eligible for disability as long as your income doesn't exceed that SGA level. So,
which is $1,620 in 2025, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, I have to consult the charts every time. I'm sure.
It's like it changes every year, but it's like $19,000 a year. It's not a lot of money.
It's not much. It's not much. But no, it's not going to affect your claim unless it exceeds that SGA amount, the $1,620 a month. And if we see if you're only able to work 4 hours a week at McDonald's, then you're only able to work that many hours. But let your adjudicator know or your representative know, because that plays into the decision. And I have had a claimant be found eligible for disability while working literally at McDonald's 9 hours a week. Right. It didn't exceed SGA. She was very clear about why she couldn't work more than that. She had always worked at a McDonald's, but just could not do more than that. Her body wouldn't let her do more. And we understand, like, you can't live on nothing. There's got to be something coming in. But if your conditions are limiting you from being able to work at that level, that SGA level, then that's definitely taken into consideration. So I would say if you're able to,
you should.
Yeah, just be sure that you're not exceeding that level, because then that would be a technical denial. The field office at that point would say you're not eligible.
Yeah, what I tell folks is $1,620 and $1,620 in 2025. If you're earning $1,619 every month, that's going to look like income suppression. So you probably don't want to do that. But if you're earning $1,400, $1,300, maybe occasionally $1,500, to me, that shows you're motivated to try to work. And, like Linda says, this is, that's as much as you can do. That shows you're motivated to work, you're trying to work. I don't think that's going to really hurt you. I do think, again, my experience is that if you're earning really, really close to the SGA number consistently every month, you may have to explain, why you couldn't work another day and get over that. So,
yeah. And if you're able to do that consistently, and so there are all these other guidelines like, oh my goodness, I'm blanking on unsuccessful work attempt, UWA. Yep. So folks who, a number of gentlemen will do this. You guys try to muscle through and underreport, but I've had a number of males who have gone back to work. I'm driving my truck, and 5 months later, I cannot do that anymore. And that's an unsuccessful work attempt. Even though you engaged in SGA, you were earning maybe $2,400, $3,000 a month for 5 months. If 5 months was your limit under Social Security guidelines, that's considered unsuccessful work attempt. You could not return to that in your full capacity.
And by the way, we didn't even talk about this, but, I have people sometimes they're getting paid cash. You got to be real careful about that, because that's when you're kind of getting close to that fraud line, number one. Number two is many times it's going to be in your medical report. So be real careful about working for cash. And
I have claimants who will do things on the side. And again, I understand that if you are not able to do your regular job, you've got to earn some money somewhere. But please report that to the field office, because if we see it in your records, we have to then send in assistance requests. The field office then has to contact you, their forms to complete, and it shows up in queries. It will show up that self-employment, and they have to under the guide. It's really not us trying to get you. Right. We just have to follow those guidelines, because if we don't, then our quality assurance people are going to kick that claim back and say, we see work, you didn't look at that, and that will just slow things down. So let us know if you do, but if you can't work at your full capacity, that's part of your record. That's important to note.
SA says, my psychiatrist wants me to undergo electroconvulsive therapy. When you see that, what does that say to you? Is that something that is significant?
It is. It's medical treatment, and that's not something that we do for folks who are feeling sad. That's typically treatment-resistant depression is where we see that.
Right.
And yes, we do see short-term memory loss is a well-known side effect with that. I'm seeing a number of folks. There's this trend toward ketamine and going to practices where it's the credentials of the person doing the treatment aren't real clear. So if it's not that acceptable medical source, psychologist, psychiatrist, medical doctor, nurse practitioner, even, those are all acceptable medical sources. I'm not saying stop your treatment, but I'm saying in the eyes of Social Security, under our guidelines, that is not given as much weight if it's your psychiatrist or psychologist that's prescribing it and conducting it.
My opinion is, ECT, that's, as SA points out, there's a 10% chance of short-term, long-term memory loss. That again, to me, would be a reason to say I'm not doing it, because that's pretty significant problem.
And that is a known side effect, and that is taken into consideration. If that's something, if that's a form of treatment that your doctor's prescribed and you're undergoing, our doctors definitely know that is a side effect, and that is taken into consideration.
Okay. Again, I'm just going to skip through some of these. I'm going to skip over some of them just because we're from interest of time. This again is Papa's Place is saying to us, I'm in stage 3 of my SSD. What is stage? Are these made up stages? What does that mean? What does stage 3 mean?
I'm not sure. Stage 3. What's the rest of the question? That might give us some context.
Let's see.
Requesting medical records.
Let's see if I go back up here, if there's anything more. It just says, I'm in stage 3 of my SSDI case. They started requesting medical records, but I'm constantly going to doctor visits, some new specialists as well. At this point in my case, what can I be doing to help my case? I know keep going to the doctor, but feel like there's something I should be getting, like recent medical records. Again, it sounds like the case is being worked by the adjudicator. And you've got to continue to tell the adjudicator that you're continuing to go to the doctor. and maybe the sort of the implied question, I've gotten this question too, is it going to cause the case to continuously be delayed if there's new stuff always being added to the, to the system? I mean, you want to get the most updated records, but let's say,
Absolutely.
is that going to slow things down?
It can, but it may also be the tipping point. It may be the straw that tips things in your favor, that, this is something that's ongoing despite having this surgery, despite going to every specialist that you've been referred to. It is important to let your adjudicator know that, because if you don't, we're going to see it in a medical record. And I sigh for my claimants if I see something that says, we discussed surgery at this appointment and we scheduled surgery for September 30th. Oh boy. Well, we have to get those records. And
Right.
if you are during the height of COVID, this was a particular difficult thing, is that somebody would be diagnosed with COVID or had symptoms, and that surgery got canceled and rescheduled. And it just sometimes felt like it was never going to end. But if your condition is severe enough, it may be that we don't even need that record. Let us know. And we might have to get that record, but it may be that you're already at the point where we have enough information. We might not need it, but let us know, because if you don't let us know and we see it in a record that there's an upcoming appointment, or you tell our panelist, our doctor who's doing your consultative exam, that I've got surgery scheduled, or I was just in the emergency room, is another one that I see a lot. Oh goodness, I have to get those records. I have to get them. But I hear you saying, like, the helplessness, like I hear it in your question of just, is there anything I can do? What can I do? I know this feels helpless, and it feels like you have no control of this process. And I hate that you are feeling that way. I know a number of people do. What can you do is just update your adjudicator. If you have treatment updates, if you have contact updates, if you move, if your number changes, please contact your adjudicator and let them know. And yeah, even if you feel like you're going to the doctor all the time, if you can call and let them know, these are the appointments I have coming up, it's with this doctor, this date, that's great. For me, I will notate the file and put reminders to myself to request those records after the day after that appointment.
What is the best way to get a hold of an adjudicator? Phone,
Yeah.
fax, email?
It's cannot email. Social Security does not allow us to email outside the agency. So we are old fashioned. It is snail mail or it is phone. Phone's probably faster. If you have access to a fax and it's free, you can definitely fax. But yeah, phone or written communication somehow, whether it's fax or mail. And if you snail mail it, I understand that by the time I get that mail, you're going to have another half dozen appointments lined up.
Right.
So yeah, one
And
of those ways.
if you do mail, I know that they use claim numbers now. They're not using Social Security numbers. You want to make sure you put your claim number on there, so that it gets to the right place, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you could put your Social Security number on it. That will also get it routed to your claim. But personally, I would hesitate to be sending that through the mail. Just that number is to be protected at all costs.
Just a couple more questions here. Pricey Joy, who's here a good bit on the live stream, talked about, which we were talking about, wet signed. And,
yes.
The 827. So the 827 is a form. It's a medical authorization. And when you talk about wet signed, it means you have a pen and you actually
signing it in ink. Yes, I'm sorry. I threw that. The first time I heard it, I didn't understand what was meant either. I thought, you want me to drip water on it? What is that doing? But I guess if you think in terms of ink being wet, then it's somebody signing with an ink pen versus an e-signature, which is typically just shows up as typed name. It doesn't look like a signature at all, but it's proof that someone went over this with you over the phone and you gave them permission to get your medical records. That's what we mean by wet signed. So yes, wet, not wet, with an ink pen.
All right. So a couple, let me just run through this one quickly. Renal cancer rights, how to remove full medical record. What's my chances? Elizabeth, I'm going to say that sounds pretty strong to me. Your age would be a big factor, but yeah, those are pretty significant problems. Are right there. Again, you got to look at the medical record, but on the face, it's pretty strong. Question.
And I would have to look at the listing, honestly, for renal cancer, because that's a condition that you can recuperate from. Not knowing the specifics of your medical condition. And I'm sorry that you've been going through that, but sometimes it's a response to treatment. Sometimes the cancer can be completely removed or resected. people can function with one kidney. So it's sometimes looking at the residuals. How does this person respond to treatment? Are they considered in remission?
Yep. Yeah. But, when you go through a significant cancer like that, a lot of times residual effects, I win a lot of cases on bowel and bladder problems because, when it comes to work and you get to a hearing,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be taking a lot of extra time off. You're in the world of, for vocational witnesses, they call it being off task. And if you're off task 15% of the day because you're in the bathroom or because you're sick, that's going to usually result in a pretty good shot for something
I
fatal.
hate that it's labeled that way, but I've seen that in the ALJ decisions that off
Yep.
task sounds like a child who's goofing around
Yep.
in class, but it means this is the percentage of the day that your conditions would
Right.
prevent you from being able to work. So
And,
yeah, it's important.
oddly, some vocational witnesses say 10%, some say 15%. There's nothing consistent about it. It's
Oh
really
no, yeah, it seems pretty subjective. I've
all
seen
right.
25%.
Yeah, couple more questions because we're right at 2 hours, and I want to let Linda go. And I need my beauty sleep, obviously. You can tell. So, all right, do adjudicators work on the weekends?
That's a great question. Typically, no. We're government employees, so we keep those hours. Keep in mind that Labor Day and other government holidays, we are not working. I've had a number of people wonder why I'm not answering on Labor Day, and it's
Right.
because we're closed. No, we do have some who will work on the weekends. They might be working overtime. They may be flexing their time. Maybe they had to take off during the week and they're catching up on the weekend. So sometimes, but I wouldn't expect them, to get someone on the phone.
Mhm.
Yeah, on the weekends.
Okay. All right. And we're just gonna do one or two more questions. People that are saying questions for Linda. Have you come across a speech impairment case caused by myalgia and trigeminal nerve irritation at the throat? And just in general, is my first thought would be, a speech impediment case or impairment case, that alone is not going to prevent you from working. There are a lot of jobs out there that you don't need to be speaking on. And trigeminal neuralgia is another condition I've never had a lot of success with. I don't know. It
I
just
will
seems
have
like,
to look that one up. I'll be
yeah,
honest. That's piqued my interest.
yeah.
Um,
But
well,
speech,
speech is typically well, not typically. It is listings level if someone is unable to communicate at all. So we see
right?
that with someone who has who is autistic, who is a non-speaker. They do not have language. They do not have a way to communicate. There are, as you said, a number of jobs you can do that don't require you to speak much. Could you do our jobs? No, that's not something that you could do. We need to talk a lot. A teacher would need to talk a lot, but there are jobs that can be done that don't require speech. So it would depend on, and I hate to keep saying it's case by case and it depends on a number of factors, but it does.
Yep.
Age, past work, yeah, and other conditions. So if you have a number of mental health conditions, that might limit your ability to do a job where you're sitting and you're looking at numbers or looking at files all day. So it would depend on a number of things. And it just depends on how limiting your condition is. Does it also impair your ability to swallow or to eat? So it would depend on other factors, how widely that condition is affecting you.
Okay. Okay. All right. We're going to leave it with that. Pricey Joy says, "Hope Linda's not on Eastern time." I am, and so we are going to end this at 2 hours. Linda, I can't thank you enough.
Oh,
This has been really enlightening just to hear, from the inside, kind of what's going on. Because I really, honestly, I've done this for 35 years now, and I think I've been to a couple of adjudication offices. One used to be near where my office was, and this was back in the day when they had physical files, and it was piled to the ceiling. But you just don't know what goes on. And what I'm kind of hearing you say is that there are adjudicators out there. You being one of them who really want to do the right thing by the people who are applying and are very aware of the long delays. I wish I could say that every single adjudicator had that same level of dedication. I don't think that's the case, but obviously, you're telling us what's supposed to happen, and certainly
yes.
that is very, very helpful. So thank you very much for taking the time to do this. It was really, really very enlightening. Any final comments, thoughts to let people leave them with as far as the Social Security process?
I really enjoyed our conversation and getting to answer questions. And I really dislike that so much of this is difficult to understand and feels, I guess, feels hidden, black box, as you said.
Yep.
I really endeavor to make the process more understandable for everyone, and try to just break down some of those um, things that are confusing, that are misunderstood. And yes, we really aren't out to get you. We really are trying to help. And we're doing that as thoroughly as possible because we have strict guidelines that we're following, and that's definitely contributing to the backlog. I think also the number of people filing has gone up as federal retirement age has increased. Well, then there are more people who are trying to continue working who physically maybe can't. So, but I was happy to be here with you and answer questions, and everyone take care.
Great. Very good.
Yeah.
All right, well, hang on for 1 second. I'm going to end the
Sure.
stream and we'll chat for a second. But everybody, thank you very much. And we will talk to you next time. Very good.